The howling wind carried her screams as Elizabeth Anderson pounded her fists against the locked door of the stagecoach, watching helplessly as it pulled away from Timberline Trading Post, abandoning her with nothing but the dress on her back and a small carpetbag. Snow was beginning to fall, dusting the Montana wilderness with white as the sun dipped low on the horizon. It was October 1873, and winter was coming early to this unforgiving frontier. "Please, stop," Elizabeth cried out, her voice cracking as the stagecoach disappeared around the bend. The betrayal cut deep. Her fiancé Thomas had promised to meet her here, to start their new life together. Instead, he had sent a cold letter delivered by the stagecoach driver. "Marriage is not for me after all. The fare is paid to return you to Boston, but I'll not have you following me to Helena." But the driver had merely tossed her bag to the ground, refused to take her back, and driven off, pocketing the return fare for himself. Elizabeth shivered, pulling her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. At 22, she had left everything behind: her teaching position, her small Boston apartment, her few friends. All for a man who had courted her through letters for a year before proposing, only to abandon her at the last moment. The trading post behind her was little more than a large cabin with a covered porch, perched at a crossroads between several frontier towns. A weather-beaten sign swung in the wind: "Timberline Trading Post, last supplies for 100 miles." Gathering what remained of her dignity, Elizabeth picked up her bag and climbed the steps. The interior was dimly lit by oil lamps, smelling of tobacco, leather, and coffee. A few rough-looking men huddled around a potbelly stove, while an older man with a gray beard stood behind the counter. "Excuse me, sir," Elizabeth said, approaching the counter. "I find myself in a difficult situation. The stagecoach has left without me, and I ain't my problem, miss," the man interrupted, barely looking up from his ledger. "Next coach ain't due for 2 weeks, weather permitting." "Winter's coming early this year." 2 weeks," Elizabeth's voice faltered. "Is there perhaps a hotel nearby where I might stay?" The men by the stove chuckled, and the proprietor finally looked up at her, his expression a mix of amusement and pity. "This ain't Boston, miss. Nearest proper town is Silver Creek, 15 miles west. Got a boarding house there, but nothing between here and there but wilderness." Elizabeth's heart sank. "Then perhaps I could stay here. I have some money. This ain't no hotel," the man said firmly. "Just a trading post. No place for a lady." The door behind Elizabeth swung open, bringing with it a gust of cold air and a dusting of snow. The room fell silent as heavy boots thudded across the wooden floor. "Evening, Jeb," came a deep, resonant voice. "Got those supplies ready?" Elizabeth turned to see a tall man unwrapping a woolen scarf from his face. His dark hair was flecked with snow, and his eyes, a startling shade of blue, briefly met hers before turning to the proprietor. "Daniel Archer," the proprietor greeted him. "Right on time as usual. Got everything packed up for you." He gestured to several burlap sacks behind the counter. "Gonna be a hard ride back to your place in this weather." Daniel nodded, his gaze returning to Elizabeth. He seemed to assess her situation at a glance: the small carpetbag, the fine but impractical dress beneath her travel cloak, the barely concealed desperation in her eyes. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat slightly. Elizabeth nodded back, unsure what to say. This man, this cowboy, had an intensity about him that made her heart beat faster, though whether from fear or something else, she couldn't say. "She got abandoned," Jeb said matter-of-factly, as if Elizabeth weren't standing right there. "Stagecoach left her, and the next one ain't due for 2 weeks. Been trying to tell her there's nowhere for her to stay." Daniel frowned, looking from Jeb to Elizabeth. That true, madam. Elizabeth straightened her spine, determined not to appear as desperate as she felt. I'm afraid so. My arrangements have fallen through and I find myself without accommodation. Daniel studied her for a long moment. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the trading post. I have a ranch, he finally said. 15 miles east of here. Got a spare room. It ain't fancy, but it's warm and safe. He paused. I'll be heading back there now. You're welcome to come along until the next stagecoach arrives. The men by the stove exchanged glances, and Elizabeth felt her cheeks flush. A proper Boston lady would never consider such an arrangement, going off alone with a strange man to his isolated ranch. But a proper Boston lady wouldn't be stranded at a frontier trading post with night falling and winter closing in, either. That's very kind, Elizabeth said carefully. But I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Daniel replied. Can't leave you here. Jeb sleeps on a cot in the back room, and this place gets filled with trappers and miners when the weather turns. Not a place for a lady alone. He looked at her steadily. I've got a housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy. Elderly woman, been with my family for years, so your reputation would be safe. Elizabeth hesitated, weighing her limited options. Stay at the trading post and face who knows what dangers, or trust this stranger who at least had the decency to offer help. Thank you, Mr. Archer, she finally said. I would be grateful to accept your offer. Daniel nodded once. We'd best get moving before the snow gets worse. He turned to Jeb. Add whatever the lady might need to my account. Don't need much, Elizabeth said quickly, not wanting to be more indebted than necessary. Just perhaps some warmer clothing. I wasn't prepared for snow. Within half an hour, Elizabeth had acquired a heavy wool coat, sturdier boots, and gloves. Daniel had loaded his supplies onto a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses and helped Elizabeth climb onto the wooden seat beside him. He wrapped a thick buffalo robe around them both before setting off. The temperature was dropping rapidly as darkness fell. Elizabeth sat stiffly beside Daniel, acutely aware of his presence, the solid warmth of him, the subtle scent of leather and pine that emanated from his clothes. I never introduced myself properly, she said after they had been traveling for some time. I'm Elizabeth Anderson. Daniel Archer, he replied, eyes fixed on the snowy trail ahead. Most folks around here call me Dan. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Archer. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. He glanced at her briefly. What brought you out here, Miss Anderson? Not many Boston ladies travel to Montana territory alone. Elizabeth's throat tightened. The humiliation of her situation came rushing back. I was to be married, she said quietly. My fiancé came west a year ago to establish himself. We corresponded regularly, and he sent for me when he felt settled. Only, it seems he changed his mind about wanting a wife. Daniel was silent for a moment. His loss, he finally said, his voice gruff. They traveled in silence for some time, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady plodding of the horses through thickening snow. The cold bit through Elizabeth's new coat, and she shivered despite the buffalo robe. Not much farther, Daniel said, noticing her discomfort. Another hour, maybe less. Elizabeth nodded gratefully. The darkness was complete now, save for the lantern hanging from the wagon and the faint glow of stars visible between breaks in the clouds. You have a ranch? She asked, trying to keep her mind off the cold. Started it 5 years ago, Daniel replied. Came west after the war with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. Worked cattle drives for a couple years, saved every penny. Bought a parcel of land that nobody wanted because it was too close to Blackfoot territory. Built it up slowly, cabin first, then barn, fences. Got about 50 head of cattle now, some horses. You built all that yourself? Elizabeth couldn't hide her admiration. had help here and there. Neighbors pitch in when needed. That's how it works out here. Everyone helps everyone, or nobody survives. The wagon crested a small hill, and Daniel pulled the horses to a stop. "There it is," he said, pointing ahead. In the valley below, Elizabeth could make out the faint glow of windows, a house, larger than she had expected, with what appeared to be several outbuildings nearby. Smoke curled from a chimney, promising warmth. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Daniel made a non-committal sound and urged the horses forward. As they approached, Elizabeth could see that the ranch house was built of sturdy logs, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Light spilled from the windows, and as they drew up to the hitching post, the front door opened. A small, stout woman stood framed in the doorway, a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "Daniel Archer," she called out. "I was beginning to worry with this snow coming down. Just took a bit longer at the trading post, Mrs. Abernathy," Daniel replied, jumping down from the wagon and coming around to help Elizabeth. "We have a guest who will be staying with us for a while." Elizabeth felt the woman's curious gaze as Daniel helped her down, his strong hands at her waist momentarily before he set her gently on the ground. "Elizabeth Anderson," Daniel said by way of introduction. "Miss Anderson, this is Mrs. Abernathy, who keeps this place and me from falling into complete disarray." "Pleased to meet you," Elizabeth said, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "Mrs. Abernathy's weathered face broke into a warm smile as she took Elizabeth's hand. "Well now, it's a pleasure to have another woman around. Come in before you catch your death. I've got stew keeping warm on the stove." She ushered Elizabeth inside while Daniel began unloading supplies from the wagon. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, a large main room with a roaring fire in the stone fireplace, sturdy wooden furniture, bookshelves filled with volumes that Elizabeth itched to explore, and colorful rugs covering parts of the plank floor. "This is lovely," Elizabeth said, looking around in wonder. "I didn't expect such civilization in the wilderness," Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. "Daniel's got refined tastes for a cowboy. His mother was a school teacher, you know, raised him with books and manners before the war took her and his pa." She helped Elizabeth remove her coat and gloves. "Now, let's get you settled. You look half frozen and famished. The spare room's just down the hall, not much, but it's clean and warm." Elizabeth followed the older woman down a short hallway to a small but cozy bedroom. A simple brass bed with a colorful quilt stood against one wall, a washstand with pitcher and basin against another, and a small chest of drawers completed the furnishings. "The washrooms across the hall," Mrs. Abernathy explained. Daniel had indoor plumbing put in last year, pride of the county, that is. Only ranch for 50 miles with hot water piped right into the house. Elizabeth's eyes widened. "That's remarkable." "He's a remarkable man," Mrs. Abernathy said with obvious affection. "Now, you wash up and join us for supper when you're ready." Left alone, Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, emotion finally overtaking her. What had happened to her carefully planned life? One day she had been a respectable teacher with a promising future as a rancher's wife. The next, she was abandoned at a trading post and rescued by a stranger. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she quickly wiped them away. Self-pity would do her no good. After washing her face and hands with the cool water from the pitcher, Elizabeth made her way back to the main room. Daniel had come inside and was warming himself by the fire while Mrs. Abernathy set the table. "Feeling better?" Daniel asked, turning to look at her. "Much thank you," Elizabeth replied. "Your home is beautiful." A hint of pride crossed his face. "It's comfortable enough." They sat down to a meal of hearty beef stew, freshly baked bread, and apple preserves. Elizabeth hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her. She tried to eat delicately, mindful of her upbringing, but the delicious meal after such a trying day made restraint difficult. "So, Miss Anderson," Mrs. Abernathy said as they ate, "Daniel mentioned you were left stranded at the trading post." Elizabeth set down her spoon, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Yes, I was. Supposed to meet my fiancé there. He sent for me from Boston, but it seems he had a change of heart." "The man's a fool," Mrs. Abernathy declared firmly. "Any fellow who'd abandon a lady like yourself doesn't deserve the time of day." "Thank you," Elizabeth said softly, touched by the older woman's forthright support. "What will you do now?" Daniel asked, his blue eyes studying her intently. Elizabeth sighed. "I suppose I'll return to Boston on the next stagecoach, though I've left my teaching position and my apartment has surely been let to someone else by now." "No family to go back to?" Mrs. Abernathy asked. Elizabeth shook her head. "My parents died when I was 16. I lived with an aunt until I was 18, then supported myself teaching at a girls' school." Daniel nodded thoughtfully, but said nothing more. After supper, he excused himself to check on the animals in the barn, leaving Elizabeth to help Mrs. Abernathy with the dishes. "He's a good man," Mrs. Abernathy said as they worked. "Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but there's not a more decent soul in these parts. Lost his wife and baby 6 years ago during childbirth. Broke him for a time. That's why he came west to start fresh." Elizabeth's heart ached at this revelation. "How terrible," she murmured. "Yes, well, life out here is hard," Mrs. Abernathy continued, "but there's goodness too if you know where to look for it." She glanced at Elizabeth. "You get some rest now. Things often look brighter in the morning." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed listening to the wind howling outside, Elizabeth considered her situation. She had exactly $12.43 to her name, not enough for stagecoach fare back to Boston. The teaching position she had left was certainly filled by now. Her few friends in Boston would help if they could, but they were working women like herself, with little to spare. And what would she return to? An empty life of genteel poverty, teaching other people's children while her own dreams of family withered. The thought brought fresh tears to her eyes. She had wanted so much more: a home, children, purpose. Sleep eventually claimed her, but her dreams were troubled by images of stage coaches racing away while she ran after them, never able to catch up. The next morning, Elizabeth woke to sunlight streaming through a small window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed quickly in the same clothes she had worn yesterday. Her others were packed away in her carpet bag and would need pressing. In the main room, Mrs. Abernathy was bustling around the kitchen, while Daniel sat at the table reading a newspaper. "Good morning," Elizabeth said, suddenly self-conscious. Daniel looked up, and for a moment, Elizabeth thought she saw appreciation in his eyes before his expression returned to its usual reserve. "Morning, Miss Anderson. Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," she lied, not wanting to seem ungrateful. Mrs. Abernathy set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her. "Eat up, child. Nothing worse than facing troubles on an empty stomach." After breakfast, Daniel pulled on his coat. "Need to check the north pasture fences. Storm might have damaged them." "Before you go," Elizabeth said, gathering her courage, "I wanted to ask, is there any work I might do while I'm here to earn my keep?" Daniel looked at her in surprise. "That's not necessary, Miss Anderson. You're a guest." "Please," Elizabeth insisted. "I can't accept charity. I'm capable and willing to work." Daniel exchanged a glance with Mrs. Abernathy, who shrugged. "Could use help with the mending and preserving," the older woman suggested. "And Lord knows the account books could use a proper looking at." Daniel's many things, but good with figures ain't one of them. I was a teacher, Elizabeth offered. Mathematics was one of my subjects. I could certainly help with accounts. Daniel considered this for a moment, then nodded. If that's what you want, we'll discuss fair wages later. After he left, Elizabeth helped Mrs. Abernathy with the household chores, then settled at the desk in the corner with the ranch's account books. They were in disarray not for lack of trying, but the system was haphazard at best. Elizabeth lost herself in the task of organizing receipts, tallying expenses, and creating a proper ledger. By mid-afternoon, she had made significant progress and was surprised when Mrs. Abernathy placed a cup of tea beside her. "You've been at it for hours, dear," the older woman said. "Take a break." Elizabeth stretched her stiff shoulders. "Mr. Archer has built quite an operation here," she observed. "The ranch is doing well from what I can tell." Mrs. Abernathy nodded proudly. "Started with nothing, he did. Now he's got one of the finest small spreads in the territory. Folks respect him." She paused. "He needs a woman, though. A ranch isn't a home without a family." Elizabeth felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure he'll find someone suitable when he's ready." Was all Mrs. Abernathy said in response, but her knowing look made Elizabeth uncomfortable. Daniel returned late in the afternoon, snow dusting his coat and hat. His cheeks were reddened from the cold, and he stamped his boots at the door before entering. "Storm damaged the north fence," he reported. "Patched it for now, but I'll need to ride out again tomorrow to fix it properly." His eyes fell on the neat stacks of papers on the desk. "You've been busy," he remarked to Elizabeth. "Your accounts needed attention," she replied. "I've organized everything by month and category. Tomorrow I can show you a system that will make it easier to maintain going forward." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "Thank you, that's helpful." The next few days fell into a rhythm. Elizabeth worked on the ranch accounts, helped Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, and even learned to make soap and candles, skills she had never needed in Boston. Daniel was often out working the ranch, but he joined them for meals, gradually becoming more talkative as he grew accustomed to Elizabeth's presence. She learned that he had fought for the Union in the Civil War, that he had a younger brother somewhere in California, and that he was respected throughout the county for his fair dealings and hard work. A week after her arrival, Elizabeth was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard hoofbeats approaching. A rider appeared, a man in his 40s with a thick mustache and a silver star pinned to his vest. "Afternoon, madam," he called, tipping his hat. "Sheriff Wilson." "Is Daniel around?" "He's in the barn," Elizabeth replied, wiping her hands on her apron, one borrowed from Mrs. Abernathy and altered to fit her smaller frame. The sheriff nodded and dismounted, leading his horse toward the barn. Elizabeth continued her work, but couldn't help overhearing their conversation when they emerged a few minutes later. "Might be nothing," the sheriff was saying, "but 3 different ranches hit in 2 weeks is concerning. Whoever it is, they know what they're doing, taking only a few head from each place so it's not noticed right away." "You think they'll come this far north?" Daniel asked. "Can't say. Just warning everyone to keep an eye out. Maybe hire on an extra hand if you can find one." After the sheriff left, Elizabeth approached Daniel. "Is everything all right?" He frowned slightly. "Cattle rustlers, operating south of here. Nothing to worry about yet." But Elizabeth could see the concern in his eyes. The sheriff mentioned hiring help. "Most of the seasonal hands have gone for the winter," Daniel explained. "Just me and old Jim Perkins looking after the place now. Jim's got a bad leg from the war, good with horses but can't ride patrol like he used to." Elizabeth bit her lip, considering. "I could help." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "With what?" "Around the ranch. I'm learning quickly, and it would free you to focus on the more demanding work. Ranch work isn't like keeping house or doing accounts, Daniel said, not unkindly. It's hard physical labor. Elizabeth lifted her chin. I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Archer. And I'm not afraid of hard work. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. We'll see. The next morning, Elizabeth rose before dawn and dressed in the warmest clothes. She had a wool skirt and blouse, with the heavy coat she had purchased at the trading post. She found Daniel in the kitchen, surprised to see her up so early. Thought I'd help with the morning chores, she explained. He looked skeptical but handed her a cup of coffee. All right then. The morning air was bitter cold as they walked to the barn. Inside, the warmth of the animals and the smell of hay enveloped them. Daniel showed her how to feed the horses and milk the cow, patiently demonstrating the proper technique when she struggled. You're a quick learner, he said, watching as she finally got the hang of milking. I've always believed one can learn anything with proper instruction and practice, Elizabeth replied, unable to keep the pride from her voice when a steady stream of milk finally hit the pail. After the barn chores, Daniel took her to the chicken coop to collect eggs, then showed her the smokehouse where meat was preserved for the winter. A ranch this size is like a small village, he explained. Has to be mostly self-sufficient, especially when winter cuts us off from town. By midday, Elizabeth's hands were chapped, her back ached, and her legs felt like lead. But there was a satisfaction in the work she had never experienced teaching grammar to reluctant young ladies in Boston. They returned to the house for the midday meal, where Mrs. Abernathy eyed Elizabeth's disheveled appearance with amusement. Teaching her the ropes, are you, Daniel? She's determined to help, he replied, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Figured I'd see how long she lasts. Longer than you might think, Mr. Archer, Elizabeth retorted, earning a genuine chuckle from him. That afternoon, as snow began to fall again, they stayed inside. Daniel showed Elizabeth his library books he had collected over the years, some inherited from his parents, others purchased on his infrequent trips to Helena. You surprise me, Mr. Archer, Elizabeth admitted, running her fingers along the leather spines. Most men in your position wouldn't prioritize books. Reading kept me sane during the war, he said quietly. Afterwards, too, when Sarah and the baby died. He rarely mentioned his deceased wife, and Elizabeth felt honored by this small confidence. I understand, she said softly. Books were my refuge after my parents died. Their eyes met, and Elizabeth felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared experience, of pain endured and survived. The moment was broken by Mrs. Abernathy calling them for supper, but Elizabeth carried the warm memory of that connection through the evening. Days turned into weeks. The next stagecoach came, and when Elizabeth made no move to be on it, and Daniel didn't mention it. She had written to her former employer in Boston, explaining her situation and requesting that any final wages be sent to her at Timberline Trading Post. The reply had been kind, but confirmed what she already knew: her position had been filled. December arrived with a heavy snowfall that kept them housebound for days. Elizabeth had gradually taken over the household accounts completely, and had begun helping Daniel with his correspondence to cattle buyers and suppliers. Her days were full, her nights restful in a way they had never been in the city. One evening, as they sat by the fire after Mrs. Abernathy had retired, Daniel cleared his throat. Christmas is coming, he said. We usually don't make much of it, just Mrs. Abernathy and me, but I thought you might want to. I mean, if you'd like to do something special. Elizabeth smiled at his discomfort. I'd love to help prepare for Christmas. It was always my favorite holiday as a child. Relief crossed his face. Good, that's good. The next day, Daniel and Jim Perkins rode out into the forest and returned with a small pine tree, which they set up in the corner of the main room. Elizabeth and Mrs. Abernathy spent an afternoon making ornaments pine cones dipped in wax, paper stars, strings of dried berries. The house filled with the scents of gingerbread and cinnamon as Mrs. Abernathy taught Elizabeth recipes passed down through generations. On Christmas Eve, they gathered around the decorated tree, the ranch house transformed by candlelight and greenery. Jim Perkins joined them, bringing his fiddle. After a sumptuous dinner, they sat by the fire while Jim played traditional carols. Daniel, to Elizabeth's surprise, had a pleasant baritone voice and joined in on the songs he knew. "I have something for each of you," Elizabeth announced when the music paused. From a basket by her chair, she withdrew 3 packages wrapped in brown paper tied with red yarn. "It's not much, but—" Mrs. Abernathy opened hers first, a hand-knitted shawl in soft blue wool that Elizabeth had worked on in secret during the evenings. "Oh, my dear, it's beautiful," the older woman exclaimed, immediately wrapping it around her shoulders. Jim received a new pipe, carved from wood by Elizabeth's own hand under Daniel's guidance. He puffed on it immediately, declaring it the finest pipe west of the Mississippi. Daniel was last. He unwrapped his gift carefully, a leather-bound journal with his initials burned into the cover. "For your thoughts and plans," Elizabeth explained. "Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you often have ideas for the ranch but forget them before writing them down. This is—" Daniel ran his fingers over the initials. "Thank you, Elizabeth. It's perfect." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart flutter. "We have something for you too," Mrs. Abernathy said, nodding at Daniel. He rose and retrieved a package from behind the tree. "It's from all of us," he said, handing it to Elizabeth. Inside was a beautiful winter coat, far nicer than the practical one she had purchased at the trading post. Made of dark green wool with fur trim at the collar and cuffs, it was both elegant and warm. "Daniel rode all the way to Silver Creek to get it," Mrs. Abernathy confided. "Said you needed a proper coat, not just something to keep off the cold." Elizabeth touched the soft fabric, deeply moved. "It's beautiful. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll come caroling with us tomorrow," Jim suggested. "Whole county gathers at the Miller's place on Christmas Day. Good food, good company." "I'd love to," Elizabeth replied, her eyes meeting Daniel's across the room. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. After morning chores and a festive breakfast, they all piled into the wagon for the journey to the Miller's ranch, some 5 miles away. Elizabeth wore her new coat, feeling both excited and nervous about meeting more of the community. The Miller's ranch house was larger than Daniel's, and already filled with people when they arrived. Elizabeth was introduced to what felt like dozens of neighbors' ranchers and their families, shopkeepers from Silver Creek, even a young doctor recently arrived from Chicago. "So you're the Boston lady staying with Daniel," said Harriet Miller, a friendly woman in her 40s. "We've all been curious." Elizabeth felt herself blush. "Mr. Archer kindly offered shelter when I was stranded at the trading post, and now you're helping with the ranch." Harriet asked, her eyes twinkling. "Just with the accounts and correspondence mostly," Elizabeth explained, "and learning about ranch life." Harriet hummed knowingly. "Well, you've certainly brought some life back to that place. Haven't seen Daniel smile so much in years." Before Elizabeth could respond, she was drawn into a group singing carols around the piano. The day passed in a blur of music, food, and conversation. She found herself genuinely enjoying the company of these frontier people, so different from Boston society, with its rigid rules and superficial pleasantries. Here, A person was judged by their character and contributions, not by their pedigree or wealth. As twilight approached, Daniel found her by the punch bowl. Ready to head back. Storm's brewing and I'd like to reach home before it hits. Elizabeth nodded, saying her goodbyes to the new friends she had made. Several people extracted promises that she would visit again, and Harriet Miller insisted she join their ladies' quilting circle that met monthly. On the ride home, snow began to fall gently. Elizabeth sat close to Daniel under the buffalo robe, no longer feeling awkward about their proximity. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he asked, glancing down at her. "Very much," she replied honestly. "Everyone was so welcoming." "Folks out here are good at taking people as they come," Daniel said. "They've accepted you as part of the community already." The words warmed Elizabeth more than the buffalo robe. Part of the community. It had been a long time since she had felt truly part of anything. The snow began falling more heavily as they reached the ranch, and by morning they woke to a world transformed. Snow drifted against the house, covering the fences and outbuildings in a pristine white blanket. "We're properly snowed in now," Mrs. Abernathy announced at breakfast. "Good thing we're well stocked." Daniel frowned, looking out the window. "Need to check on the cattle in the south pasture. Make sure they've got access to feed." "You can't go out in this," Elizabeth protested, alarmed by the intensity of the blizzard visible through the windows. "Have to," Daniel said simply. "Cattle will die otherwise." He dressed in his heaviest clothes, including a fur-lined coat and hat. Elizabeth watched anxiously as he prepared, then surprised herself by stepping forward and adjusting his scarf to better cover his face. "Be careful," she said softly. Something flickered in his eyes. "I will." After he left, Elizabeth found it impossible to concentrate on her usual tasks. She paced the house, checking the windows frequently for any sign of his return. Mrs. Abernathy watched her with knowing eyes but said nothing. Hours passed. The short winter day began to darken, and still Daniel had not returned. Elizabeth's worry turned to fear. "He should be back by now," she said, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. Mrs. Abernathy nodded, her own concern evident. "Jim went to check the barn an hour ago. Daniel's horse hasn't returned either." "We have to do something," Elizabeth insisted. "He could be lost or hurt." "Can't send anyone out in this, child. Would just have more people in danger." But Elizabeth couldn't accept that. She went to her room and put on every layer of clothing she owned, including her new coat. When she returned to the main room, Mrs. Abernathy looked at her in alarm. "What do you think you're doing?" "I'm going to find him," Elizabeth said with determination. "Jim can show me which pasture he went to." "You'll freeze to death," Mrs. Abernathy protested. "You don't know the land like Daniel does." "I can't just sit here," Elizabeth replied. "Please help me prepare. Food, matches, whatever might be needed." Something in her expression must have convinced the older woman that argument was futile. With a resigned sigh, Mrs. Abernathy began gathering supplies: a flask of whiskey, strips of jerky, matches in a waterproof pouch, extra blankets. Jim Perkins was equally opposed to her plan, but equally unable to dissuade her. "South pasture is 3 miles that way," he said, pointing. "Follow the creek. It's mostly frozen but still visible. Cattle should be in the sheltered valley beyond the ridge." "I'll find him," Elizabeth promised, mounting the sturdy mare that Jim had saddled for her. "Take this," he said, handing her a pistol. "Signal if you find him 3 shots in the air. We'll come if the weather lets up enough." The cold hit Elizabeth like a physical blow as she rode away from the ranch house. The snow was falling so thickly that she could barely see 10 feet ahead. She kept the creek to her left as Jim had instructed, trusting the mare to find solid footing beneath the snow. Time lost meaning as she pressed forward. Her face grew numb despite the scarf wrapped around it, and her hands, even in thick gloves, ached with cold. But fear for Daniel drove her onward. What if he was lying injured somewhere? What if his horse had fallen, throwing him? What if he was slowly freezing to death while she struggled to reach him? The thought was unbearable. In the weeks she had spent at the ranch, Daniel had become important to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. His quiet strength, his hidden gentleness, the pain he carried but never used as an excuse, all of it had worked its way into her heart. The mare stumbled, nearly sending Elizabeth toppling into a snowdrift. She righted herself, patting the horse's neck encouragingly. "Just a bit further, girl, we have to find him." They crested a small ridge, and Elizabeth peered through the swirling snow, trying to make out the valley Jim had described. There a darker shape against the whiteness. Cattle huddled together for warmth, but no sign of Daniel. Elizabeth urged the mare forward, scanning desperately for any hint of movement. Then she saw a horse standing alone near a fallen tree. Daniel's horse. She rode toward it, heart pounding. As she drew closer, she could make out a shape leaning against the tree. Daniel, half buried in snow. "Daniel!" she cried, dismounting awkwardly and trudging through knee-deep snow to reach him. He stirred at her voice, raising his head weakly. His face was alarmingly pale, his lips tinged blue. "Elizabeth!" His voice was barely audible over the wind. "What are you doing here? Too dangerous." "Looking for you," she said, kneeling beside him. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Horse slipped on ice," he mumbled. "Fell, think my leg's broken. Tried to mount up again but couldn't." Elizabeth felt fear clutch at her heart. A broken leg was serious enough in good conditions. In this blizzard, it could be fatal. She had to get him back to the ranch somehow. "Can you stand at all, if I help you?" He nodded weakly. "Maybe, with support." Elizabeth pulled his arm around her shoulders and braced herself to take his weight. Together, they managed to get him standing on his good leg. "Your horse," she said. "We'll get you on him. He's stronger than my mare." Step by painful step, they made their way to where Daniel's horse stood. Getting him mounted was a challenge, but desperation lent Elizabeth strength she didn't know she possessed. Finally, he was seated, swaying slightly but upright. "Tie my leg," he instructed through gritted teeth. "To the stirrup, so it doesn't swing." Elizabeth did as he asked, using a scarf to secure his injured leg. She then mounted her own horse, took the reins of Daniel's, and fired 3 shots into the air as Jim had instructed. "Let's go home," she said, turning the horses back the way she had come. The journey back was torturous. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness, and Elizabeth had to constantly check that he was still securely on his horse. The cold seemed to seep into her very bones, and several times she feared they had strayed from the path. But the creek remained their guide, and eventually, miraculously, lights appeared through the snow. The ranch house, windows glowing like beacons in the storm. Jim and 2 neighboring ranchers who had arrived to help search met them halfway from the house. They took Daniel from his horse and carried him inside, where Mrs. Abernathy had prepared the couch near the fire. "His leg's broken," Elizabeth explained, her teeth chattering as she shed her snow-covered outer garments. "And I think he's suffering from the cold." The next hours were a blur of activity. The men cut away Daniel's boot and pant leg to reveal a nasty break midway down his shin. The young Dr. Elizabeth had met at the Millers' Christmas gathering was summoned and arrived despite the weather. "Clean break," he pronounced after examination. "Painful but should heal well if we set it properly." He looked at Elizabeth. "You found him just in time. Another hour in that cold." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The doctor gave Daniel whiskey for the pain, then set the bone with a swift, practiced motion. Daniel's roar of pain cut through Elizabeth like a knife, but she held his hand throughout, letting him squeeze hers until she thought her fingers might break. When the leg was splinted and bandaged, and Daniel given laudanum to help him sleep, the doctor pulled Elizabeth aside. "You saved his life today," he said quietly. "Riding out in that blizzard, it was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever heard of a Boston lady doing." "It wasn't a choice," Elizabeth replied simply. "I couldn't leave him out there." The doctor studied her face for a moment, then nodded as if confirming something to himself. "I'll check on him tomorrow if the weather allows. Keep him warm, change the bandages as I showed you, and make sure he drinks plenty of fluids." After everyone had gone and Mrs. Abernathy had retired for the night, Elizabeth sat beside the couch where Daniel slept. The fire had burned low, casting the room in a warm glow. Outside, the blizzard still raged, but inside was peace and safety. Elizabeth gently brushed a lock of dark hair from Daniel's forehead. His color was better now, his breathing steady and deep. The strong, capable man who had rescued her at the trading post now looked vulnerable in sleep, his features relaxed in a way she rarely saw when he was awake. In that quiet moment, watching the rise and fall of his chest, Elizabeth finally admitted to herself what she had been feeling for weeks. She had fallen in love with Daniel Archer. The realization should have frightened her. After all, she had come west to marry one man and now found herself in love with another. But there was nothing frightening about this feeling. It felt right, as if her heart had found its true home. Whether Daniel could ever return her feelings, she didn't know. But sitting there in the firelight, she made a silent promise to herself. Whatever happened, she would stay. This ranch, these people, they had become her family. And families stayed together, through blizzards and broken legs and whatever else life threw at them. Daniel's recovery was slow and often frustrating for a man accustomed to hard physical labor. January passed in a haze of snowstorms and quiet days indoors. Elizabeth read to him from his collection of books, played chess with him, discovering to her delight that she could occasionally beat him, and helped him with ranch business that couldn't wait. By early February, he was able to move around with crutches, his mood improving with his increased mobility. Elizabeth had taken on more responsibilities around the ranch, working alongside Jim Perkins to ensure everything ran smoothly during Daniel's convalescence. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Daniel set aside the book he had been reading. "Elizabeth," he said, her name now natural on his lips, "we need to discuss your situation." Her heart skipped a beat. "My situation? You've been here almost 3 months now. The winter's starting to break. Stagecoach will be running regularly again soon." Elizabeth felt her stomach tighten. Was he asking her to leave? Had she misread everything? "I see," she said carefully, keeping her face neutral despite the panic rising inside her. "I've been thinking," Daniel continued, seemingly unaware of her distress. "The ranch needs someone to manage the accounts permanently. Someone educated, good with correspondence. And Mrs. Abernathy isn't getting any younger, could use help with the house." Elizabeth waited, uncertain where this was going. "What I'm trying to say," Daniel went on, his usual confidence faltering, "is that there's a place for you here, permanently, if you want it." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by uncertainty. What exactly was he offering? Employment? Or something more? "Are you offering me a position, Mr. Archer?" she asked, needing clarity. He frowned slightly at her formal address. "I'm offering you a home, Elizabeth. But yes, with proper wages for the work you do. A home." The word resonated within her. It was more than she had dared hope for, even if it wasn't everything her heart wanted. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I would like that very much." Daniel nodded, looking pleased but still somewhat unsettled. "Good, that's good." As February turned to March, Signs of spring began to appear, patches of bare ground where snow had melted, the return of birds, longer days filled with sunlight. Daniel's leg healed steadily, and soon he was walking with only a slight limp and the aid of a cane. Elizabeth settled into her new role, officially managing the ranch's business affairs while assisting Mrs. Abernathy with household duties. She wrote to her few remaining contacts in Boston, informing them of her decision to stay in Montana Territory. One sunny afternoon, Elizabeth was hanging laundry when she heard riders approaching. 3 men she didn't recognize came into view, leading several horses behind them. "Afternoon, madam," the leader called out, tipping his hat. "This the Archer place?" Something about their manner put Elizabeth on alert. "It is. Mr. Archer isn't available at the moment. Can I help you?" The men exchanged glances. "Just passing through," the leader said. "Thought we might water our horses if that's all right." "The creek's just beyond that rise," Elizabeth replied, pointing. "You're welcome to water them there." "Much obliged," the man said, but instead of heading toward the creek, the 3 riders moved closer to the house. Elizabeth's unease grew. She remembered the sheriff's warning about cattle rustlers months ago. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I have work to attend to." She turned to go inside, but the leader's voice stopped her. "Actually, madam, we're looking for something specific. Heard Archer's got some fine breeding stock. Thought we might discuss a purchase." Before Elizabeth could respond, the door to the house opened and Daniel emerged, his cane in one hand and a rifle in the other. "I'm not selling any stock today," he said calmly, though Elizabeth could see the tension in his stance. "Best be on your way." The leader's friendly demeanor vanished. "Now that's not very neighborly, Archer. We came a long way." "Wasn't aware rustlers needed to travel far these days," Daniel replied. "Sheriff Wilson's been looking for men matching your description. 3 ranches hit south of here." The men stiffened, hands drifting toward their weapons. Elizabeth's heart pounded as she slowly edged toward the house. "Elizabeth," Daniel said quietly, "go inside and get the shotgun from above the door. Bring it here, please." She nodded, walking as steadily as she could toward the house, feeling the rustler's eyes on her back. "Don't try anything stupid, Archer," the leader warned. "It's 3 against 1, and from the looks of that cane, you're not at your best." "4 against 3, came Jim Perkins' voice from the barn doorway, where he stood with his own rifle raised. "And I might have a bum leg, but I can still shoot straight." Elizabeth retrieved the shotgun and returned to Daniel's side, handling the weapon with unexpected confidence. Growing up in Boston, she had never imagined herself in such a situation, yet here she stood, ready to defend her home alongside Daniel. The standoff lasted several tense moments before the leader finally spat on the ground. "Not worth getting shot over," he muttered. "Let's go, boys." They rode off slowly, looking back several times as if memorizing the layout of the ranch. "They'll be back," Jim said grimly once the riders were out of sight. "Probably with more men." Daniel nodded. "Ride to Silver Creek, Jim. Tell Sheriff Wilson what happened." "I'll send word to the neighboring ranches to be on alert." After Jim departed, Daniel turned to Elizabeth, his expression softening. "You handled yourself well." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Couldn't tell," he said with a hint of pride. "You're becoming quite the ranchers." He stopped abruptly as if catching himself. "The ranchers what?" Elizabeth asked, her heart suddenly racing for an entirely different reason. Daniel looked away. "Nothing. Come on, let's get inside." That night, as Elizabeth prepared for bed, she found herself replaying the unfinished sentence in her mind. The rancher's what? Partner? Assistant? Or had he been about to say something else entirely? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at her bedroom door. She opened it to find Daniel standing there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "May I speak with you?" he asked. "Of course," she replied, stepping back to let him enter, conscious of the impropriety but too curious to care. Daniel paced the small room for a moment before turning to face her. "What happened today? It made me realize something." Elizabeth waited, hardly daring to breathe. "When those men showed up, my first thought wasn't for the ranch or the cattle," he continued. "It was for you, your safety." "Daniel, please, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I've been a fool, Elizabeth, offering you a position, a place here when what I really want, what I've wanted for months now." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I have since that day you rode through a blizzard to find me." Joy surged through Elizabeth, so intense she felt dizzy with it. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have for so long." Daniel closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I never thought I'd feel this way again after Sarah died. Never thought I'd want to, but you changed everything." He released one of her hands to cup her cheek gently. "I'm not offering you a job, Elizabeth. I'm offering you my heart, my name, my life, if you'll have them." Tears of happiness spilled down Elizabeth's cheeks. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Daniel's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and grief. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, then deepening as Elizabeth responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he murmured. "Before I forget I'm supposed to be a gentleman." Elizabeth laughed softly. "Yes, you should, but tomorrow." "Tomorrow I'll speak to Reverend Thomas in Silver Creek," Daniel finished. "See how soon he can marry us." He kissed her once more, briefly but tenderly, then left, his steps lighter than she had ever seen despite his lingering limp. Elizabeth sank onto her bed, her heart too full for sleep. From abandoned at a trading post to beloved fiancé in the span of a few months' life had taken an unexpected turn indeed. The rustlers did return as predicted, but they found the Archer Ranch prepared. Sheriff Wilson and a posse of neighboring ranchers were waiting, resulting in a brief but decisive gunfight that left 2 rustlers dead and the rest in custody. Daniel, despite his still healing leg, had fought alongside the others with Elizabeth and Mrs. Abernathy providing support and ammunition from the house in the aftermath. As the community gathered at the ranch to celebrate the victory, Daniel took Elizabeth's hand and led her onto the porch. "Folks," he called, commanding immediate attention. "Got an announcement to make." The crowd quieted, all eyes turning to them. "Miss Elizabeth Anderson has done me the great honor of agreeing to become my wife," Daniel announced, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Wedding set for 2 weeks from today at the Silver Creek Church. You're all invited." A cheer went up, followed by congratulations and well wishes from all sides. Harriet Miller hugged Elizabeth tightly. "Knew it from the moment I saw you two at Christmas," she said smugly. "Never seen Daniel look at anyone that way before." The following 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparations. Word spread throughout the county, and gifts began arriving: daily handmade quilts, preserved foods, practical household items that showed the community's acceptance and support. Elizabeth wrote to her former landlady in Boston, asking that her few remaining possessions be sent west. Among them was her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in tissue paper. When it arrived just days before the wedding, Mrs. Abernathy helped her alter it to fit, both women wiping away tears as they worked. On the morning of the wedding, the ranch house was filled with activity. Harriet Miller and several other women arrived to help Elizabeth prepare, bringing flowers forced in hothouses despite the early spring, and small luxuries like rose-scented soap and hair ribbons. "Something borrowed," Harriet said, fastening a pearl necklace around Elizabeth's throat. "Been in my family 3 generations." Mrs. Abernathy provided something blue, a handkerchief with Elizabeth's new initials embroidered in blue thread. "Started working on it the day you rode out in that blizzard after him," she confessed. "Knew then what was happening between you two." When Elizabeth finally emerged from her room in her mother's ivory dress, her hair arranged in soft curls beneath a lace veil, the women fell silent. "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Abernathy finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're a vision." The church in Silver Creek was filled to capacity when Elizabeth arrived. Jim Perkins, dressed in his Sunday best, waited to escort her down the aisle in place of her father. "You've made him whole again," Jim told her as they waited for the music to begin. "Never thought I'd see it." The simple country church had been transformed with wildflowers and ribbons. As the first notes of music sounded, Elizabeth took Jim's arm and began the walk toward her future. Daniel stood at the altar, tall and handsome in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes fixed on her with such love that Elizabeth felt her heart might burst from joy. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the elderly Reverend Thomas speaking of love's endurance through hardship, of 2 lives joining to create something stronger than either alone. When Daniel slipped a simple gold band onto Elizabeth's finger, his mother's ring, saved all these years, his hand was steady, his voice clear as he repeated his vows. "I, Daniel James Archer, take thee, Elizabeth Marie Anderson, to be my lawfully wedded wife." Elizabeth's own voice trembled slightly as she made the same promises, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her to this moment. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Thomas declared. "You may kiss your bride." Daniel's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of all that was to come. The church erupted in cheers and applause as they turned to face their community as husband and wife. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family in the county. A makeshift dance floor had been constructed in the barn, and Jim Perkins and several other musicians played while couples danced and children ran laughing between the adults. "Happy, Mrs. Archer?" Daniel asked as they swayed together to a slow waltz. "Completely," Elizabeth replied, marveling at how right her new name felt. "Though I still can't believe how much my life has changed since that day at the trading post." "Best day of my life," Daniel said softly, "though I didn't know it then." Later, as the party continued around them, they slipped away to the porch for a moment alone. The spring night was cool but clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. "I have something for you," Daniel said, pulling a small package from his pocket. "A wedding gift." Elizabeth unwrapped it to find a small silver locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of Daniel on one side, and on the other, a lock of dark hair. "It's beautiful," she breathed, immediately fastening it around her neck. "Belonged to my mother," Daniel explained. "The hair was mine as a child. Thought you might like to add a lock of your own and eventually—" He paused. "Eventually, maybe a lock from our children." Elizabeth felt tears spring to her eyes at the thought. "I'd like that very much." He drew her close, and they stood together looking out over the land that was now truly their home. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully in moonlit pastures. The barn and outbuildings stood solid against the night sky. Inside, the sounds of music and laughter spilled from windows glowing with lamplight. "Not bad for a Boston lady abandoned at a trading post," Daniel murmured against her hair. Elizabeth smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Not bad for a lonely cowboy who took her home," she replied. They sealed this new understanding with a kiss, unaware that Mrs. Abernathy watched from the doorway, satisfaction written across her weathered features. She had known from the start that these two broken souls would heal each other. Now they had a lifetime to build the family they both deserved. 5 years later, Elizabeth Archer stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as her husband led their 3-year-old son, James, on a gentle pony around the corral. The little boy's laughter carried on the summer breeze, his dark hair so like his father's ruffled by the wind. "Not too fast, Daniel," she called, though she knew her cautioning was unnecessary. Daniel was endlessly patient with their son, just as he was with their 1-year-old daughter, Sarah, named for the wife he had lost long ago, a gesture of healing that had touched Elizabeth deeply. Sarah was currently napping in the cradle beside Elizabeth, her chubby cheeks flushed with sleep. One tiny hand curled around the silver locket that still hung around Elizabeth's neck, now containing locks of hair from all 4 Archers. The ranch had prospered over the years. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the herd had nearly doubled in size. Elizabeth still managed the accounts and correspondence, though now she did so with a child often in her lap or playing at her feet. Mrs. Abernathy remained with them, though she had gradually ceded many of her duties to Elizabeth. Now she functioned more as a beloved grandmother to the children, telling them stories of the old days and sneaking them treats when she thought Elizabeth wasn't looking. Jim Perkins had his own small cabin on the property now, having become an official partner in the ranch operations after proving his worth during Daniel's recovery and the rustler incident. He was courting a widow from Silver Creek, and Elizabeth suspected another wedding might be on the horizon. The sound of hoofbeats drew Elizabeth's attention to the road, where a familiar wagon was approaching. She smiled, recognizing Harriet and George Miller, their regular Sunday visitors. "Look who's coming, Sarah," she murmured to the now stirring baby. "Your godparents are here for dinner." As the Millers pulled up, Elizabeth reflected on how completely this place had become her home. Sometimes she could hardly remember the nervous Boston teacher who had arrived at Timberline Trading Post 5 years ago, heartbroken and abandoned. That woman seemed like a stranger compared to the confident ranch wife and mother she had become. Daniel lifted James from the pony and walked toward the house, the little boy chattering excitedly about his riding adventure. As they reached the porch, Daniel leaned down to kiss Elizabeth, then gently touched his sleeping daughter's cheek. "Did I ever tell you," he said quietly, "that the moment I saw you at the trading post, something told me you were going to change my life?" Elizabeth smiled up at him. "Only about 100 times," she teased, "but I don't mind hearing it again." "Well, it's true," he insisted, wrapping an arm around her waist as they watched the Millers climb down from their wagon. "Best decision I ever made, taking you home that day. And the best twist of fate that ever happened to me," Elizabeth replied, "being abandoned at that trading post." Their eyes met in perfect understanding before they turned to welcome their friends, secure in the knowledge that what had begun as an act of kindness had blossomed into the family. They had both been searching for a family forged not by blood, but by love, choice, and the courage to begin again.